All right. Hey, how's it going? Again, try to follow along if you want to. So we're gonna all have these components as part of our game. If you miss a step or whatever, it's okay. You can go back and do it later. But also, if I go over something too fast or it doesn't make sense, raise your hand and I'll be happy to go back over it or try to clarify what we're doing. So I'm going to review a little bit. I'm going to go to create a new project. And the first thing I'm going to do is add in my character art that I created in Piskel. So I kind of mentioned this earlier. You can obviously create art within the Scratch platform. But this is not typical for development environments. Usually, you have an art program and you make your art assets and then you bring it over into a programming environment. So that's why we're practicing that process using Piskel. Again, if you want to use other art programs, that's fine. You just have to you follow similar styling. But anyway, I'm going to go back over to the Finder and go to my folder, MMP 210. Oh wait, these are my recordings. Maybe this is, here it is, under Documents. Okay. So in my MMP 210 folder, here I have the sprites that I created last week, and I have them at 3 different sizes. And so I'm going to choose the size that I think is the best, which is 2x. And so these are the ones that I exported at double the scale when I exported it. And so I'm going to use this as the basis for my character instead of the default little cat that Scratch gives us. So I'm just going to X this guy out. And then when I want to upload a new character, I can go to this sprite little button here and then click on the upload. And the first time I do this, let's make sure I'm in the right folder. Here we go. So the first time I do this, I'm just going to choose one sprite because otherwise it's going to put them all, there's going to add 3 sprites if I choose all 3 images. So I'm just going to click open here. And so now I have my little sprite and I'm going to go over to costumes. And I'm just going to call this first costume idle. If you have like an idle animation with multiple frames, you could call it like idle 1 or idle 0 or something. But I'm just going to use that one frame, so I'm just going to call it idle. Maybe I'll change this later. And then if you look here, you can actually edit this. You can draw on it and stuff like that. You can zoom in and zoom out. This kind of shows you how big it is on the stage, so you can get a sense of how big it is. Or if you hit the equal button, it zooms into the actual size. And you can flip, vertical and horizontal if you want. So you can do a little bit of editing within here if you need to. But that's basically what we want to do is we have our little idle frame. So then I want to add a couple more costumes. So when I'm changing the way that the sprite looks, I'm going to use costumes for this. So the sprite is kind of one thing. The costumes are how we add animation and other states. So I'm going to go to choose a costume, and I'm going to upload my second 2 frames, which is my walk animation. And so I'll just call this first costume walk_1. And this next costume, I'm going to call it walk_2. And so this way I can switch between these costumes to get a very basic walk animation. And then I can go back to idle when I'm done walking. Okay, so I've set up my character again. I'm going to go back to my code. And so for today, what we're going to do is we want to position the character on the screen when the game starts. We want to give the player the ability to move the character. I'm just going to do left and right. For the game that I'm creating, that's all I really need. But if you guys want to add different types of motion, that's something that you can do if you want to. I can help you out with that. And we're just going to add movement and animation. So we're going to add a few blocks. We're reviewing a little bit what we did last week. We're also going to be adding a couple new things that we haven't talked about yet. Some of you guys have already tried those things. So it's good to kind of explore stuff. But we'll just start adding our sprite code. What I want to do first is just position the character at the beginning of the game. So we're going to need one of these when green flag clicked sprites, or sorry, code blocks. And we're probably going to need a couple of these. So I might drag a few more over if I want to get set up, but let's just start here. So when we click, I want to put the character like right here in the bottom of the screen. So I'm going to go to motion, and I'm going to go to XY and pop that on there. And so I want the X to be 0 so that the character is centered. And I want the Y to be kind of like below 0. 0 is in the middle. So I want it to be like maybe -100. So then if we click the flag, that's going to be the starting point for the character. If we like that, that's good. We just leave it. And I'm happy with that. So now we can start looking into some motion. So we'll go back to our events, and we're going to get a new green flag. And we're going to start designing our motion. One thing that I haven't talked about is that you can add comments to different blocks. So this block is very simple. Somebody could read this and really quickly understand, okay, this just centers the player at the beginning of the game. There's not a lot that needs to be explained there. So I don't really need a comment. You might want to add a comment. This block down here is going to get pretty complicated. So one thing that programmers like to do is use comments to remind themselves, and also to, if you're working with another developer, just explaining what a big chunk of code does. So that way they don't have to read through it to understand it. They can just read the comment and say, oh, I know what this is supposed to do. And then as we add more blocks of code, that's going to help us because we'll be able to more quickly figure out which block does which. So my comment here is going to say this controls the character movement and animation. Very simple. Don't need to go into any more depth than that. But now you can see there's this nice little comment here. If I come back here later and I've got like a whole bunch of different blocks, I can just open this comment and say, okay, that makes sense. Now I know what this does. And I, can edit that block. Okay. So now let's look at, so when we were doing motion last week, you may have done something like this. You may have gone and added a key pressed, gone and added move 10 steps, and changed this to like, right arrow. And now if we do this, we can move our character. So this is pretty good, but notice there's a couple issues with this. One is that if I hold this down, notice there's a little pause before the character continues moving. That's because of something that's called key repeat. On the computer in Mac and Windows, there's this thing where when you hit the key, it registers as one press, and then there's a pause before it starts to do those additional presses. And the reason for that is when you're typing, if you need a little bit of a pause, if you're writing like a word, you don't want to randomly add extra characters and stuff like that. So to kind of like to consider for the fact that people type at different speeds, there's a little pause there before it starts to repeat. So this design doesn't really work exactly right. It does a little bit of what we want, but it doesn't do it perfectly. So we need to use a little bit, a slightly different design for this to work. And using this design means that we actually have to use a few different structures. So we're going to go over those now. So I'm going to keep this move 10 steps, but I'm going to get rid of this guy here. So I'm going to go down here to this sensing area. We didn't really look at this last week. Some of you guys have used components from here. But you can see there's a few things here that tell us about what's happening on the computer. So is the mouse down? Is a key pressed? Stuff like that. So we can drag this in here, but notice that there's no little indents on the top or bottom. We can't connect blocks to this sensing block. This sensing block has to go into a control structure that's going to say whether or not it's happening. So if we go back to control here, we can see there is a if block. Okay, so we're going to look at this. So we have if, and we're going to say key pressed, and I'm going to drop that in there. So let's change this to right arrow. And then I'll drop this move 10 steps in there. And so now, if I press my arrow key, still nothing happens because we're not getting any, there's nothing telling this to run. So we still need a little bit more of a control block. We need to ask if this is happening all the time. So that's where this forever block comes in handy. This forever block means that the program is always asking the entire time our game is running if we're pressing the key. So it's happening forever. It's just always going. So if we throw a forever around this guy, and then of course we have to activate it. So we say when clicked. So now we get this nice smooth movement when I hit the right key. So what's happening is the forever block is always checking to see if we're pressing a key. That's this guy. The if block is checking to see if we're pressing that right key. And then if we are, we're gonna move 10 steps. So this is good for now. We're gonna end up kind of redoing a lot of this stuff, but we'll see what happens as we start to build it out. Okay, so then let's duplicate this block. So I'm gonna right click here and duplicate and throw it down here. And so we'll do our left arrow here and we'll do -10. Okay, so now we have forever. If we hit the right arrow, move 10 steps. If we hit the left arrow, move -10 steps. Okay, so now if I hit right and left, if I hit them both at the same time, he stays still, right? Because we're doing both of them. Okay, so now we've got our back and forth movement. Okay, there are more sophisticated ways to do it, but you know this is a good way to get this aspect of our movement. Okay, so now we're gonna do animation. Any questions on the movement before we continue on with our animation? Let me see. Yeah. Yeah, you should add the extra sprites in the costumes area. But yeah, so notice that the code changes when you click on each sprite.
Right.
So the code is only related to whatever sprite you added it to. So you might want to delete the others, and that might simplify things a little bit. Yeah, just make sure you keep that one. And then try running it again and see if...
It moved a little bit, something like that, before it didn't move at all.
Okay, and if you hit the arrow keys... Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's do the animation. Okay, so there's different ways to do this. One is to do it within the system the structure that we already have. But another way to do it is separate it into a different structure. Either way is fine. Different people have different preferences. The way that you'll see it in most programming environments is that they're separate, that the movement and the animation are handled separately, even though they're using some of the same logic. The way we're going to do it is just recreate this structure, but change it to animation. Again, this is not the most sophisticated way to do this, but for our game, it's very simple. We're just going to start with some basic, a pretty basic setup. So I'm just going to duplicate this entire block and throw it over here. And then I'll change the comment a little bit and just say this controls the character movement. So I'll just delete that part. And then I'll scroll over here and I'll update this comment. This controls the character animation. So we're looking for the same key presses. So I've already figured out a lot of the logic, but this is actually a little bit different because we're gonna wanna set our character back to idle. So we wanna use a slightly different structure for this. So I'm gonna actually get this guy. This is called if else. So this is the same thing, except it's gonna look for if we're pressing a key, but if we're not pressing a key, it's gonna do something else. So I'm gonna throw this in here. And I'm gonna put it at the top, if it'll let me. kind of have to figure out how to... Well, there's so many different ways to do this. The thing that is cool but also frustrating about programming is that there's a million different ways to solve every problem. So even just dragging around, I'm like, oh, maybe it would be good to do it a different way. But anyway, I'm going to throw this here. And then I'm going to grab this guy and put it there. And then I'm going to grab this. Well, actually, I don't need this anymore. So let's grab the left arrow, and then I'm just going to trash this whole thing. Okay, so then I'm going to duplicate this if else and throw the left arrow in here. And this got moved over here, so let's just delete that. Okay, so now we have this big structure. It's similar to this guy over here, but it's a little bit different. So we're still doing when flag click, so it happens at the beginning. We're still saying forever, so it's always checking for this. Then we're still looking for the right arrow pressed. We're still looking for the left arrow pressed. But now what we want to do is if in here we're moving, we're gonna do the character animation. And if we're not moving, then we're not gonna do the character animation. My character animation actually is the same if I'm moving right or left. So I actually could just do something a little different here. But I don't want to get too complicated right now. So I'm just going to leave this as is, even though it's a little bit repetitive. Okay, so now what we need to do is set up our animation. So let's go to looks. And so if we're pressing the right arrow key, we're going to switch our costume. We're going to switch it to walk 1. And then we want to wait a little while so that it doesn't just like spam the graphics. So let's go to events. And let's go to, control. And let's go to wait. And I'm going to say 0.1 here, just so it doesn't wait for very long. And then I'm going to switch the costume again. So I'm going to say walk 2, that's fine. And then I'm going to wait again. So I'll actually just duplicate this. Oh, I could have just duplicated that whole thing. Anyway, so I've got switch costume to walk 1, wait 0.1 second, switch costume to walk 2, wait 1 second. But then notice that this is only going to happen once when I press the key. What I need to do is repeat this. Okay, so I could repeat a number of times, or I could repeat until. There's a whole bunch of different things I can do, but I just want this to keep going. So I'm going to have another forever block right here around my animation. Okay, so now I've got a bunch of blocks. They're starting to get more condensed. So sometimes when you're dragging these around, you might get them in the wrong place. It can be a little tricky, but I think this is basically what we want. So as long as we're pressing this if, we're gonna switch between these costumes. And then down here, else, if we're not pressing that button, let's make sure we go back to our idle costume. And again, if your idle is an animation, just do another kind of forever animation here. So let's see if that works. Okay, so I've got my animation. But he keeps going. Okay, I might have gotten the order wrong, but let's do the other part and then we'll check it. Okay, I might have forgotten the order or something, but we'll figure it out. Okay. So we're gonna do the same thing with our left arrow. So let's just duplicate this big block here and throw it there. And then actually we don't need this left arrow anymore. So let's get rid of that. And I'm using the same animation here, so I don't need to do anything there, but you might be doing something different. So let's try that. So now if I go to the left and if I go to the right. Okay, so I've got most of my logic going. I think I missed something because it's not switching to my idle. So I must have gotten the order wrong. Let's see, we've got if, arrow pressed. Do this. Actually, you know what? I think I don't need this. Let's try this without the forever block. think I might have been getting ahead of myself. Okay, let's try it again. There we go. Okay, that forever block was a bad idea. I got a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, so again, not the most sophisticated way to do this, but this does the job. Okay, so when we run our game now, if we move to the right, he kind of walks. If you move to the left, he kind of walks. And then a couple of things you'll notice about this, we're repeating a lot of stuff, right? Like this wait 0.1 seconds. If I wanted to wait less than that, I'd have to go and update this a bunch of times. We're repeating this whole like block itself, essentially. So there's a lot of stuff in here that you might notice is very repetitive. It's not very efficient. So as we learn more programming structures, we'll learn how to do things in a more efficient way. But for now, we're just going to try to keep things simple. We're going to learn new blocks one at a time. Okay, so we've got our character movement. We have our animation. And so we've got, you know, everything that we want up until this point. So we'll take a break for a second. Let me stop the recording.